Texas Territory, 1858. Three young women huddle together in the back of a prison wagon as it rumbles across the harsh, unforgiving landscape. The eldest clutches a tattered family Bible, the last remnant of their former life. Their breath catches as the wagon hits another deep rut, sending pain through their shackled wrists. The endless prairie stretches before them, their destination a notorious women's workhouse where few survive more than a year. What awaits them isn't the sentence they were unjustly given, but a twist of fate involving a violent storm, an unexpected encounter with Comanche warriors, and a hidden valley where the rules of the outside world hold no power. In the wild expanse where few dare to venture, the Mason sisters will discover that sometimes true freedom comes only when everything familiar is stripped away. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The prison wagon rattled violently as it traversed another deep gully in the barely passable trail. Inside, 23-year-old Abigail Mason bit back a gasp as the iron shackles cut deeper into her already raw wrists. Beside her, 19-year-old Rebecca and 17-year-old Charlotte leaned against each other, their faces pale beneath the grime of 3 days' travel. "How much further, do you reckon?" Charlotte whispered, her once vibrant green eyes now dull with exhaustion and fear. "Don't matter how far," grunted the driver's assistant, a man they'd come to know as Briggs. His tobacco-stained teeth showed in what passed for a smile as he leered at them through the iron bars. "Ain't nobody ever come back from Willow Creek workhouse, especially not pretty little things like you three." Abigail straightened her spine, fixing Briggs with a level gaze that betrayed none of the terror churning in her stomach. "We're innocent of all charges, as we've told the judge repeatedly. This injustice will not stand." Briggs laughed, a harsh sound that scattered a pair of startled doves from a nearby mesquite tree. "That's what they all say, darlin'. Judge Parker don't make mistakes, and Sheriff Durbin's got a special interest in your case." His eyes lingered unpleasantly on Rebecca, who shrank back against Charlotte. "Sheriff's mighty disappointed you refused his generous offer of marriage." "I'd rather die than marry that monster," Rebecca muttered. The wagon hit another rut, jolting them all. The driver shouted for Briggs, who gave them one last leering glance before turning away. When he was out of earshot, Charlotte whispered, "Do you think anyone believed Widow Hawkins's testimony?" Abigail sighed, her fingers tracing the worn leather cover of their mother's Bible. "It doesn't matter now. The judge had made his decision before we ever stepped into that courtroom." 3 weeks earlier, the Mason sisters had been respectable members of the community in the small town of Providence, Texas. Orphaned when their parents died of fever 2 years before, they had continued running the family's small dressmaking shop, building a modest but stable life for themselves. Everything changed when Sheriff Durbin, a man with political ambitions and a reputation for cruelty, began pursuing Rebecca. His advances rejected, the sheriff had fabricated charges of theft, claiming valuable items from the Reynolds estate had been found in the sisters' possession. Despite Widow Hawkins's testimony that the items had been legitimate payment for dresses commissioned by the late Mrs. Reynolds, Judge Parker, the sheriff's cousin by marriage, had sentenced all 3 sisters to 5 years at the notorious Willow Creek Women's Workhouse. The real reason for their conviction was as transparent as it was vicious. Isolated at the workhouse, Rebecca would eventually have no choice but to accept the sheriff's mercy and his renewed offer of marriage. And if she continued to refuse, well, workhouse inmates frequently succumbed to fever, exhaustion, or accidents. "The clouds look strange," Charlotte observed, peering through the small barred window of the wagon. Indeed, the western sky had darkened ominously, with clouds the color of bruised flesh piling upon one another. "Storm's coming," Abigail noted, a flicker of something, not quite hope but perhaps opportunity, stirring within her. She had been watching the terrain carefully, mentally marking their route. They were traversing increasingly remote country, with settlements growing farther apart. The two men transporting them, Briggs and the driver Haskell, were armed but careless. Over 3 days of travel, Abigail had observed their routines, noted when they drank from a whiskey flask, saw how they grew complacent with the monotony of the journey. Most importantly, she had discovered that the key to their shackles hung on a ring at Haskell's belt, a belt he removed each evening when they made camp. "Listen to me," she whispered urgently to her sisters, keeping a wary eye on Briggs, who was occupied with lighting a cigarette despite the threatening weather. "Tonight, when they make camp, be ready. If that storm hits as hard as it looks like it will, we might have our chance." Rebecca's eyes widened. "Abby, you can't mean—" "Would you rather face what awaits us at Willow Creek?" Abigail asked grimly. "We've heard the stories. Few women survive 2 years there, let alone 5. Charlotte, always the most pragmatic despite being the youngest, nodded firmly. "I'd rather die trying to escape than waste away in that place, or be forced into marriage with men like Sheriff Durbin." The first fat drops of rain began to fall as thunder rumbled in the distance. Up front, Haskell cursed and urged the tired horses to greater speed, hoping to reach suitable shelter before the full force of the storm descended. "There's an abandoned trading post about 3 miles ahead," he shouted to Briggs. "We'll wait out the storm there." The wind picked up, bending the scrubby trees along the trail as lightning split the darkening sky. The wagon lurched and swayed, alarmingly, as Haskell pushed the team harder than was wise on the rough terrain. Inside, the sisters braced themselves against the wooden sides of the wagon, exchanging meaningful glances. The abandoned trading post would offer shelter, but it might also provide the opportunity Abigail had been waiting for. "Whatever happens," Abigail told her sisters, raising her voice above the growing howl of the wind, "stay together. No matter." "What? We stay together?" The rain was falling in sheets by the time the dilapidated trading post came into view. A squat, stone structure with a partially collapsed roof, but walls solid enough to provide shelter from the intensifying storm. Haskell drew the wagon up as close to the building as possible, and Briggs jumped down, cursing as he was immediately drenched. "Get them inside," Haskell ordered, nodding toward the sisters as he struggled to calm the frightened horses. "I'll see to the team." Briggs unlatched the wagon door and roughly dragged each sister out, showing them toward the trading post's sagging doorway. The interior was dark and smelled of mold and rodents, but it was dry compared to the deluge outside. "Ain't this cozy?" Briggs sneered, pushing them down onto the dusty floor in a corner of the single room. "Don't get any ideas. Storm or no storm, you try to run, we'll hunt you down like the criminals you are." Lightning struck close by with a deafening crack, making even Briggs jump. The subsequent thunder was so powerful it seemed to shake the very foundation of the old building. "I'll check on Haskell," Briggs muttered, casting one more warning glance at the sisters before stepping back into the storm. The moment he was gone, Abigail leaned in close to her sisters. "This is Providence," she whispered fiercely. "A storm like this, in country like this, they won't be able to track us if we can get away." "But the shackles," Rebecca protested, lifting her chained wrists. "Haskell will remove his belt when he comes in to dry off," Abigail said. "I've watched him do it every night. The key is on his belt ring." Charlotte's face was pale, but determined in the dim light filtering through the broken windows. "How do we get it?" "We create a distraction," Abigail explained rapidly, aware that the men could return any moment. "When they're both inside, Charlotte, you're going to feign a seizure. You remember how Widow Hawkins's son looked when he had his spells?" Charlotte nodded grimly. "Rebecca and I will call for help, act panicked. When they're focused on Charlotte, I'll try for the key. If I can get even one of us free, we might have a chance." A fresh barrage of rain hit the roof, sending a stream of water through the damaged section to puddle on the floor. Outside, they could hear Haskell shouting something to Briggs, their words lost in the roar of the storm. "What if we do get free?" Rebecca asked. "We're in the middle of nowhere, in Comanche territory. Even if they don't catch us, how would we survive?" Abigail clutched their mother's Bible tighter. "We'll find a way. Mother always said the Lord provides for his children, even in the wilderness." Her expression hardened. "And any fate we find out there has to be better than what awaits us at Willow Creek." The door burst open, and Haskell staggered in, followed by Briggs. Both men were soaked to the skin and in foul tempers. "Damned horses nearly broke free," Haskell growled, removing his dripping coat and, as Abigail had predicted, unbuckling his belt to wring out his sodden shirt. The keyring dangled tantalizingly from it, just as she had observed on previous nights. The sisters exchanged a silent look of understanding. The storm outside was reaching its peak, with wind howling through every crack in the old building. Nature itself seemed to be conspiring to mask any sounds of their attempted escape. It was now or never. Charlotte caught Abigail's subtle nod and began to tremble softly at first, then with increasing violence. She let out a choked sound and fell sideways, her body stiffening as she enacted a frightening imitation of an epileptic seizure. "Help her!" Rebecca cried, her fear only partially feigned, as Charlotte's performance proved disturbingly convincing. "She needs help!" Both men turned toward the commotion, momentarily startled by the sudden crisis, and in that crucial moment, Abigail Mason made her move. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Abigail moved with the silent grace she had perfected while caring for her fever-stricken parents years earlier. With Charlotte convulsing convincingly on the floor and Rebecca crying out in distress, both men's attention was diverted. Haskell had draped his belt over a broken chair near the doorway, the precious key ring glinting in a flash of lightning. 3 steps. That was all that separated Abigail from their chance at freedom. Briggs knelt awkwardly beside Charlotte, his expression a mixture of annoyance and uncertainty. "What's wrong with her?" he demanded, looking to Rebecca. "The falling sickness." Rebecca sobbed, clutching at his sleeve. "Please, she needs water and air. Help her." As Haskell moved closer to examine Charlotte, Abigail slipped behind them. Her fingers closed around the cold metal of the keyring, suppressing a triumphant gasp as she quickly tucked it into her sleeve. She had just stepped back toward her sisters when the entire building shook with a thunderous crack. "What the—" Haskell began, then shouted as a section of the already compromised roof gave way under the storm's assault. Rain poured through the new opening, and in the chaos that followed, men cursing, debris falling, Charlotte suddenly recovering from her seizure. No one noticed Abigail passing the key to Rebecca, who immediately began working on their shackles behind their backs. "Get them away from that corner," Haskell ordered Briggs, pointing to where more of the ceiling threatened to collapse, "and secure that door before it blows clear off." The men struggled against the elements that seemed determined to aid the sisters' escape. Water streamed across the dirt floor, turning it to mud. Wind howled through the broken windows and damaged roof, extinguishing the single lantern Briggs had managed to light. In the darkness, Rebecca freed first herself, then Charlotte, and finally Abigail. They kept the unlocked shackles loosely around their wrists, waiting for the perfect moment. It came sooner than they dared hope. A deafening crack split the night as lightning struck the old cottonwood tree beside the trading post. The massive trunk, weakened by age and fire damage from years past, toppled directly onto the remaining solid portion of the roof. The impact sent Haskell and Briggs diving for cover as more of the ceiling caved in. "Now!" Abigail hissed, and the three sisters bolted for the door, discarding their shackles as they plunged into the raging storm. The rain lashed at their faces with stinging force as they ran, holding hands to avoid separation in the near-total darkness. Behind them, they heard Briggs shouting, followed by the report of a pistol, but the storm swallowed both sound and bullet. "This way!" Abigail pulled her sisters toward a dense thicket of mesquite she had noted earlier. The thorny branches tore at their prison dresses, but offered concealment as they pushed deeper into the brush. "They'll come after us as soon as the storm passes," Rebecca gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "Then we need to be far away by then," Abigail replied grimly. "Keep moving." For hours they struggled through the darkness, guided only by occasional flashes of lightning. The storm began to abate as dawn approached, the rain reducing to a steady drizzle. With the first faint light, they could see they had entered a rugged landscape of limestone ridges and cypress-lined creeks, terrain that would be difficult for the prison wagon to traverse. "Look!" Charlotte pointed to the muddy ground. "Wagon tracks, from yesterday before the rain got heavy." Abigail nodded. "Good. We'll go in the opposite direction. They'll expect us to follow the road, trying to reach the nearest settlement." "Which would be where?" Rebecca asked, wringing water from her long auburn hair. "The driver mentioned Fort Richardson being 2 days' travel ahead," Abigail recalled. "So we head west instead, into the hills." Charlotte's face paled. "That's Comanche territory." "Everywhere is someone's territory," Abigail said firmly. "At least the Comanche won't be looking specifically for us." They set off westward as the sun rose, revealing a landscape transformed by the storm. Creeks had become rushing torrents, carrying uprooted vegetation and debris. Birds emerged to sing in the aftermath, and twice they startled deer drinking from newly formed pools. By midday, the sisters had reached a series of limestone bluffs that offered some shelter from both the elements and searching eyes. Exhausted, they huddled in a shallow cave, taking stock of their meager resources. "All we have is Mother's Bible and the clothes on our backs," Rebecca said, her voice hollow with a despair she had kept at bay during their flight. "And our freedom," Abigail reminded her, though she too felt the weight of their desperate situation. "We need food and proper shelter before nightfall." Charlotte, who had learned much from their father about living off the land, ventured a short distance from their hideout. She returned with a handful of prickly pear fruits and some edible roots. "It's not much," she apologized, "but it will keep us going." They ate the bitter fruits gratefully, then took turns keeping watch, while the others slept in fitful bursts. The summer sun beat down, steam rising from the rain-soaked earth as the temperature climbed. Their wet dresses dried stiff with sweat and mud. "We should keep moving," Abigail decided as afternoon waned. "Haskell and Briggs will have started searching by now." They had just emerged from their temporary shelter when Charlotte froze, her hand gripping Abigail's arm. "Listen," she whispered. In the distance they could hear the baying of hounds. "Bloodhounds," Rebecca breathed, her eyes wide with terror. "The sheriff keeps them for tracking escaped slaves." Abigail's mind raced. They couldn't outrun dogs, not in their weakened state. "The creek," she decided. "We'll follow it upstream. Watermask's scent." For the next hour, they waded through the cold, swift-running creek, fighting the current and slipping on moss-covered rocks. The baying grew fainter, then stopped altogether, but they dared not leave the water until they had put significant distance between themselves and their pursuers. As dusk approached, they finally emerged from the creek, their feet numb and bleeding. From sharp stones and broken shells, the land had changed subtly. Less brush, more stands of oak and pecan trees. In the fading light, they spotted a plume of smoke rising beyond the next ridge. "A campfire," Rebecca whispered. "Maybe a settler, or traveler who could help us. Or it could be Haskell and Briggs," Charlotte cautioned. Abigail considered their options. Night was falling, and with it the temperature would drop. They were wet, hungry, and exhausted. Without help or shelter, they might not survive until morning. "We'll approach carefully," she decided. "Stay hidden until we can see who's there." They crept toward the source of the smoke, using the growing darkness as cover. Cresting a small rise, they looked down into a protected hollow where a campfire burned. Around it sat not settlers or their pursuers, but 5 Comanche warriors. Rebecca stifled a gasp, and Charlotte's hand tightened around Abigail's. All 3 women had grown up hearing terrifying stories about the fierce Comanche raiders who controlled vast territories across Texas. Their father had once pointed out a woman in town whose scars told the tale of years spent as a Comanche captive. Before being ransomed back to her family. "Back away slowly," Abigail breathed. "Don't make any sudden." The snap of a twig behind them made all 3 sisters whirl around in panic. They found themselves face to face with a 6th Comanche warrior who had been gathering firewood. His dark eyes widened slightly in surprise at finding 3 white women huddled on the ridge above his camp. For a breathless moment, no one moved. Then, the warrior called out to his companions in his native tongue. Almost immediately, the other men were on their feet, some reaching for weapons. "Run!" Rebecca cried, turning to flee, but they had nowhere to go. The ridge had hidden the approach of 2 more warriors who now blocked their escape route. Within moments, the sisters found themselves surrounded. The warrior who had discovered them approached Abigail. He was younger than the others, perhaps in his mid-20s, with a strong face and a scar that ran from his right temple to his jawline. Unlike the stories that had painted all Comanche as savages, this man's eyes held intelligence and caution rather than bloodlust. He spoke, gesturing toward the valley below, but the sisters couldn't understand his words. "Please," Abigail said, stepping protectively in front of her sisters. "We mean no harm. We're just trying to find safety." The warrior's expression changed, subtly as he noted their prison dresses, now tattered and mud-stained, and the raw marks on their wrists where the shackles had been. He spoke again to his companions, and a rapid discussion followed. Darkness had fully descended, and with it came the distant sound they had been dreading, the baying of hounds, closer now than before. The Comanche warriors heard it too. The scarred warrior made a quick decision, gesturing urgently for the sisters to follow him down to the camp. When they hesitated, he pointed toward the sound of the dogs, then made a cutting motion across his throat. The message was clear. Whoever was tracking them with those dogs was an enemy to these Comanche as well. Left with no choice, the Mason sisters descended into the hollow, surrounded by warriors whose intentions remained a mystery, but who seemed, at least for the moment, to be offering refuge from the men who would return them to chains. As the campfire illuminated their faces, the scarred warrior studied them intently before speaking a single word they understood. "Nashoba," he said, touching his chest. "A name." Abigail straightened her shoulders, determined to show courage despite her fear. "Abigail," she replied, then gestured to her sisters. "Rebecca, Charlotte." Nashoba nodded once, then turned to give swift orders to the others. 2 warriors immediately disappeared into the darkness, heading in the direction of the hounds. Another began quickly extinguishing the fire. In less than a minute, the hollow was plunged into darkness, and the sisters found themselves being led away into the unknown depths of Comanche territory. The Comanche led the sisters through the darkness with uncanny precision. Nashoba moved ahead of the group, his steps silent despite the rough terrain. 2 warriors guarded the rear, periodically stopping to listen for signs of pursuit. The baying of the hounds had faded, replaced by the night sounds of crickets and distant coyotes. Rebecca stumbled on a hidden root, biting back a cry as pain shot through her ankle. Immediately, Nashoba was beside her, his strong hand steadying her elbow. His touch was firm but not rough, surprising Rebecca, who had expected cruelty-based on the frontier tales that had shaped her understanding of the Comanche. "Thank you," she whispered. Nashoba didn't respond with words, but his slight nod acknowledged her gratitude. They traveled through the night, following what appeared to be game trails that wound through increasingly steep and rocky terrain. The sisters' prison shoes, already deteriorating from their creek crossing, began to fall apart entirely. Charlotte removed hers first, preferring bare feet to the blisters caused by the disintegrating leather. Rebecca and Abigail soon followed suit. As false dawn lightened the eastern sky, their small party crested a ridge that revealed a breathtaking vista. Below them lay a hidden canyon, its walls rising nearly vertical on three sides. A narrow entrance, barely visible even from their vantage point, provided the only apparent access. Within the canyon's embrace, they could make out the silvery ribbon of a stream, stands of oak and cottonwood trees, and patches of meadow grass. "It's beautiful," Charlotte breathed, momentarily forgetting their precarious situation. Nashoba gestured for them to continue down a nearly invisible path that zigzagged along the canyon wall. The descent was treacherous, requiring them to practically crawl in some sections where the trail narrowed to mere inches. By the time they reached the canyon floor, the sun had cleared the eastern ridge, bathing the hidden valley in golden light. Up close, the canyon revealed itself as even more remarkable. The stream flowed crystal clear over smooth stones, forming occasional pools deep enough for swimming. Wildflowers carpeted sections of the valley floor, bluebonnets, Indian paintbrush, and Mexican hat blooming in vibrant patches. Game trails suggested deer and other wildlife made their home here. Most surprising was the evidence of human habitation. Near the canyon's northern wall stood several traditional Comanche teepees, their hide coverings weathered but well-maintained. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and Abigail could see women moving about, some tending to children. This was no temporary camp, but something more permanent, a hidden settlement. Their arrival caused immediate interest. Children paused in their play to stare at the bedraggled white women. The women approached cautiously, their expressions ranging from curiosity to undisguised hostility. An older man emerged from the largest teepee. His hair showed streaks of grey, and he carried himself with the unmistakable authority of a leader. He spoke rapidly to Nashoba, his gestures indicating questions about the sisters. "What do you think they're saying?" Charlotte whispered. "They're deciding what to do with us," Abigail replied softly, maintaining a dignified posture despite her exhaustion and fear. After a lengthy exchange, Nashoba approached the sisters. He pointed to himself, then to the older man. "Nashoba," he said then, "Tabe, father." Understanding dawned on Abigail. "His father is the chief," she murmured to her sisters. "Nashoba," continued his limited communication, pointing to the sisters, then making a gesture like chains around his wrists, followed by running motions with his fingers. "He's explaining that we're escaped prisoners," Rebecca interpreted. Tabe studied them for a long moment, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. Finally, he spoke a command, and two Comanche women approached. They were perhaps a few years older than Abigail, with identical braided hair and similar features that suggested they might be sisters themselves. With gentle but firm guidance, these women led the Mason sisters toward a small teepee set somewhat apart from the others. Inside, they found clean furs spread on the ground for sleeping, a small fire pit in the center, and basic provisions, water. In a clay pot, dried meat and wild berries in woven baskets. The Comanche women indicated through gestures that the sisters should rest. One touched her chest and said, "Ayana." The other followed with, "Ituha." "Abigail," responded the eldest Mason sister, then indicated her siblings. "Rebecca, Charlotte." After Ayana and Ituha departed, securing the tippy flap behind them, the sisters finally allowed themselves to relax slightly. "Do you think we're prisoners or guests?" Charlotte asked, eagerly reaching for the berries. The sisters hadn't eaten properly in days. "Both, perhaps," Abigail replied thoughtfully. "They've clearly rescued us from Haskell and Briggs, but I doubt they'll let us leave any time soon." Rebecca sank down onto the furs. I don't care. For the moment, we're safe, and that's more than we could have hoped for yesterday. Despite their intention to remain vigilant, exhaustion quickly overcame all three women. They fell into deep sleep, huddled together on the soft furs, as they had done since childhood during times of uncertainty or fear. When they awoke, the quality of light filtering through the tipi covering suggested late afternoon. Charlotte sat up first, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. "Someone's outside," she whispered, hearing soft footsteps circling their shelter. The teepee flap opened, revealing Ayana bearing a bundle of clothing. Simple buckskin dresses, far more practical than their tattered prison garments. Behind her came Ituha, with a wooden bowl of what appeared to be stew, the steam carrying a rich aroma that made the sisters' stomachs growl audibly. Through gestures and the few words they shared, the Comanche women indicated that the sisters should change and eat, then follow them. The buckskin clothing felt strange against skin, accustomed to cotton and wool, but the sisters couldn't deny the comfort it provided. "We looked like characters from one of Father's adventure books," Rebecca observed, running her hands down the simple but well-crafted dress. Outside, they found the canyon bathed in the golden light of approaching sunset. Children played near the stream, while women worked at various tasks, preparing food, tanning hides, weaving baskets. The men appeared to be returning from hunting, carrying several deer carcasses between them. Nashoba approached, his expression less guarded than it had been the previous night. He gestured for them to follow him to where Tabe sat outside the main tipi, smoking a long pipe. The chief observed them through narrowed eyes, his gaze lingering on Abigail, who met his scrutiny with quiet dignity. After a long moment, he spoke, with Nashoba translating as best he could with his limited English. "Father asked why white women run from other whites," Nashoba said, his accent thick but his meaning clear enough. Abigail considered how to explain their situation simply. Bad men, false accusations, prison. She mimicked being shackled, then pointed to the mark still visible on her wrists. Tabe nodded slowly, passing his pipe to a younger man beside him before speaking again. Nashoba translated, "White law, not. Reach here, canyon safe place." "How long can we stay?" Abigail asked, keeping her words simple. When this was translated, Tabe's expression darkened. He spoke at length, with Nashoba listening intently before turning back to the sisters. "White. Soldiers hunt our people, push us from hunting grounds. Soon, maybe no safe place for Comanche." He paused, struggling to convey his father's full meaning. "You stay until safe path found, or until you learn our ways." This last statement hung in the air between them, its implications unclear. Were they being offered temporary sanctuary, or was there an expectation they would become part of the tribe? Before Abigail could ask for clarification, a commotion arose at the canyon entrance. Two warriors who had been standing guard came running, calling out in urgent tones. The reaction was immediate. Men reached for weapons, women gathered children, supplies were quickly collected. "What's happening?" Charlotte asked, anxiety clear in her voice. Nashoba's expression had turned grim. "White men, with dogs. Found. Trail to canyon." Abigail's heart sank. Somehow Haskell and Briggs had tracked them to this hidden refuge. "It's our fault," she said. "We led them here." Tab barked orders to his warriors, who formed a defensive line near the canyon entrance. To the sisters' surprise, Nashoba guided them not toward the back of the defensive formation, but to his father's side. "You know these white men," he said to Abigail. "You tell father what kind of fighters." Abigail described Haskell and Briggs as best she could, their weapons, their temperaments, the likelihood they had reinforcements. As she spoke, she noticed something in Taabe's expression change from wariness to a grudging respect for her practical assessment. The sun had dipped below the western ridge, casting the canyon in premature twilight. In this uncertain light, they waited, Comanche warriors prepared to defend their hidden sanctuary, and three sisters caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. The distant baying of hounds echoed off the canyon walls, growing steadily. Closer! Tension mounted as shadows lengthened. Tabe turned to Nashoba, issuing what seemed to be final instructions. The younger man nodded, then approached the Mason sisters. "Come," he said quietly. "Father says I take you to special place, more hidden, safe even if white men enter canyon. We won't hide while others fight because of us." Abigail objected. Nashoba shook his head. "Not just for you. For our women. My children too. Sacred cave. Only use when greatest danger threatens." Understanding dawned on Abigail. They weren't being singled out for protection. They were being included in the tribe's emergency measures, treated not as outsiders, but as people worth protecting. As Nashoba led them toward a nearly invisible fissure in the canyon's eastern wall, Abigail cast one last glance back at the gathering Comanche warriors. Their faces, painted now for battle, showed grim determination rather than fear. "You think they can defeat Haskell and Briggs?" Rebecca asked softly. "I don't know," Abigail replied honestly, "but I do know that nothing will ever be the same after tonight." With that sobering thought, she followed Nashoba into the darkness of the sacred cave, her sisters close behind. The fissure in the canyon wall appeared barely wide enough to admit a person, let alone a group. Nashoba pressed himself sideways into the opening, motioning for the sisters to follow his example. Charlotte, being the slimmest, went next, followed by Rebecca, with Abigail coming last. The passage was so narrow that the rough stones scraped against both their backs and chests simultaneously. "I can't breathe," Rebecca whispered, panic edging into her voice as the walls seemed to close in further. "Keep moving," Abigail encouraged her. "It will open up soon." She spoke with more confidence than she felt, having no actual knowledge of what lay ahead. After about 20 feet of claustrophobic passage, the fissure abruptly widened into a small antechamber. Nashoba had produced a torch from somewhere and was lighting it, the sudden flare illuminating a space large enough for them to stand comfortably. But this was merely the entrance to something far more impressive. As they followed Nashoba deeper, the passage opened into a vast cavern that drew gasps of wonder from all three sisters. The ceiling soared at least 30 feet above them, with natural columns of limestone connecting floor to roof like the pillars of a cathedral. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, creating a musical backdrop to their footsteps. "It's magnificent," Charlotte whispered, her voice echoing slightly. They were not alone. By the light of several torches they could see that about 20 members of the tribe, mostly women, children, and the elderly, had already taken refuge here. Among them were Ayana and Ituha, who immediately came forward to guide the sisters to a section of the cave where furs and blankets had been arranged. Beyond this main chamber, smaller caves branched off in several directions. From one came the soft lowing of what sounded like cattle or perhaps buffalo calves. Another appeared to contain stored supplies. Abigail glimpsed stacks of dried meat, baskets of corn, and clay pots as they passed. "They're prepared for a siege," she observed quietly to her sisters. Nashoba, overhearing, nodded. "Sacred cave keeps our people safe many winters. Has water." He pointed to where a small spring bubbled up through the cave floor, forming a crystal-clear pool before disappearing into another fissure. "Has food, has many exits." This last revelation particularly interested Abigail. "Other ways out?" Nashoba seemed to understand her strategic thinking. "Yes, 3 more paths. One goes far mountain, one goes river, one goes—" He struggled for the word, then pointed upward. "High place, watching place." An older woman approached, her face deeply lined but her eyes sharp and alert. She spoke rapidly to Nashoba, who listened respectfully before turning to the sisters. "This Mekawi, old mother of tribe, wise woman, she say you help prepare. Prepare for what? Rebecca asked. For if fighting comes here, Neshoba explained grimly. Women sharpen spears, make arrows, gather healing plants. Makawi beckoned the sisters to follow her to where several women were indeed preparing weapons, sharpening stone blades, attaching feathers to arrow shafts, and mixing what appeared to be medicinal compounds in small stone bowls. Through gestures and the few words she knew in English, Makawi assigned tasks to each sister. Abigail, whose steady hands had served her well in sewing, was given arrow feathers to attach. Rebecca was directed to help sort bundles of herbs, while Charlotte was shown how to mix a poultice that apparently served to prevent wound infection. As they worked alongside the Comanche women, a strange sense of camaraderie developed, transcending the language barrier. When Charlotte correctly identified a medicinal herb based on knowledge their father had taught her, Makawi's eyes widened with approval. When Abigail demonstrated a particularly secure method of binding the arrow feathers, the women nodded appreciatively. It's odd, Rebecca murmured to Abigail as they worked, but I feel more useful here than I ever did in Providence. Abigail understood exactly what her sister meant. In town, they had been viewed primarily as potential wives or, at best, dressmakers. Here, their practical skills were valued without the suffocating expectations of proper female behavior. After what seemed like hours of preparation, they heard footsteps echoing through the entrance passage. Everyone tensed, hands moving to weapons, until a young Comanche boy appeared. He spoke urgently to the gathered women, who immediately broke into animated discussion. Neshoba, who had been checking the secondary escape routes, returned to translate. White men at canyon entrance, 6 men, dogs. Our warriors stop them. 6. Abigail's heart sank. There were only 2 with the prison wagon. Sheriff Durbin must have sent reinforcements when they didn't arrive with us, Charlotte realized. A distant sound reached them even through the thick cave walls, the unmistakable crack of rifle fire. They're fighting, Rebecca whispered, her face pale. Neshoba's expression was grim but determined. My father is great warrior. Our men know this land, these rocks. White men fight in strange place, in darkness. Another series of shots echoed, followed by what might have been shouting. The women in the cave gathered the children close, speaking in soothing tones despite the tension evident in their own postures. Makawi approached Abigail, speaking words she couldn't understand, but conveying through gestures that they should move deeper into the cave system. Abigail hesitated, torn between seeking greater safety and wanting to know what was happening outside. We should go where she indicates, Rebecca urged. We've brought enough trouble to these people. Before they could move, however, another young messenger arrived, breathing hard from his run. His news, whatever it was, caused visible relief among the Comanche. What's happened? Abigail asked Neshoba. Fighting over, he replied, a hint of pride in his voice. 2 white men dead. Others, run away. Dogs run away too, scared of night sounds. The sisters exchanged glances, their emotions complex. They hadn't wished death on anyone, even their pursuers. Yet the alternative might have been disaster for themselves and the tribe that had sheltered them. My father wants to speak with you, Neshoba continued. When safe to leave cave? An hour. Later, when scouts had confirmed that the remaining white men had truly departed, the cave's occupants began returning to the canyon. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the sky. Near the main teepee, 2 bodies lay covered with blankets. Not white men, but Comanche warriors who had fallen in the defense of their home. Tabe stood beside the bodies, his face etched with grief that transcended cultural differences. When he saw the sisters approaching, guided by Neshoba, he straightened, his expression shifting to one of grave formality. Through Neshoba's improving translation, he addressed Abigail directly. "Two of my sons now journey to the spirit lands," Tabe said, gesturing to the fallen warriors. "Their blood has purchased safety for our people and for you and your sisters." Abigail felt the weight of this sacrifice like a physical burden. "We never intended to bring death to your people," she said softly. "We are deeply sorry for your loss." When this was translated, Tabe studied her for a long moment before responding. "The white men who came were already enemies of the Comanche. They have burned our villages before, stolen our horses, killed our hunters. This fight would have come whether you were here or not," he continued, his words measured. "But now blood has been spilled. The white men will return with more guns, more men. This hidden place may no longer remain hidden." "Then we should leave," Abigail said promptly. "Draw them away from your people." Taabe shook his head after hearing the translation. "3 women alone would not survive, and the white men would still come here, believing we hold you." He gestured toward the eastern wall of the canyon. "There is another place, a valley beyond the mountains, known only to a few Comanche. It has belonged to our people since before my grandfather's time, but we visit it rarely, only in the harshest winters or greatest danger." Nashoba took up the explanation. "Father says we must take people there now. Leave this canyon before more white men come. Too many tracks now, too easy to find this place again." "And us?" Charlotte asked. "What happens to us?" Tabe's response, once translated, surprised all 3 sisters. "You come with us. Blood has been spilled protecting you. Now you are bound to our people until the spirits decide otherwise." The implication was clear. They were now considered part of the tribe, at least temporarily. Not prisoners, but not entirely free to leave either. "How soon would we depart?" Abigail asked, her practical nature asserting itself. "At first light," Nashoba answered. "We take only what can be carried, leave no sign of where we go." As the sisters helped the tribe prepare for their dawn departure, Charlotte pulled Abigail aside. "Abby, what are we doing? We're going deeper into Comanche territory, farther from any white settlements." Abigail glanced to where the tribe's women were quickly packing essential supplies, working with the efficiency of people accustomed to moving on short notice. "What alternative do we have, Charlie? Return to Silver Cliff to hang for murdering Haskell and Briggs, because that's what Sheriff Durbin will claim happened. But becoming part of a Comanche tribe? What would Father say?" Rebecca, who had been listening nearby, joined them. "Father taught us to judge people by their actions, not the color of their skin or the language they speak. These people have died protecting us. They've shared their food, their clothing, their sanctuary." Abigail nodded. "For now, our safest path lies with them. We'll see what this new valley holds and what opportunities might arise from there." As they spoke, Nashoba approached, carrying extra buckskins and small packs for each sister. His expression was solemn, but not unkind. "The journey will be difficult," he warned. 3 days through mountains, little water, little rest. You must be strong." Abigail accepted the supplies with a determined nod. "We'll keep up." For a moment, something like admiration flickered in Nashoba's eyes. "I believe you will," he said simply, before moving on to help an elderly woman secure her belongings. As the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, the tribe gathered at the canyon's rear wall, where a nearly invisible trail zigzagged upward to the rim. Looking back at the peaceful valley that had briefly been their refuge, Abigail felt a pang of regret for the violence their presence had brought to this place. Yet, as they began the steep ascent, following the Comanche into the unknown, she also felt a curious sense of anticipation. For the first time since their parents' death, they were moving towards something, rather than simply running away. Whatever awaited them in the secret valley beyond the mountains, they would face it together. 3 sisters bound by blood, and now bound by circumstance to a people they had been taught to fear, but were beginning to understand. The mountain trail proved more challenging than anything the Mason sisters had ever encountered. It wasn't a path in any conventional sense, but rather a tenuous route across rocky ridges, through narrow defiles, and along precipitous ledges that sometimes narrowed to mere inches. The Comanche moved with practiced confidence, even those carrying children or helping the elderly. By midday, all three sisters had bloodied their hands on the sharp limestone. Charlotte's makeshift moccasins, crafted hastily from scraps of buckskin, had already worn through in places, forcing her to bind her feet with strips torn from her undergarments. Still, none of them complained. "Keep moving," Abigail encouraged her sisters as they navigated a particularly treacherous section where the trail skirted a sheer drop. "Just focus on the next step, not how far we have to go." The tribe maintained a punishing pace, driven by the knowledge that pursuit could resume at any moment. Children old enough to walk did so without complaint. Younger ones were carried in slings or on travois, pulled by the stronger adults. The old and infirm were supported between family members, their dignity preserved by their stoic determination to keep up. Watching this display of tribal unity, Abigail felt simultaneous admiration. Her outsider status. Despite being included in the exodus, the sisters were clearly still viewed with caution by many tribe members. Midway through the afternoon, they stopped briefly at a hidden spring that bubbled from a crack in the mountainside. As they refilled water skins and tended to minor injuries, Macawi approached the sisters with a small clay pot of greenish paste. "4 feet," she explained in halting English, gesturing to Charlotte's blood-stained wrappings. "Stop pain, stop rot." Charlotte accepted gratefully, applying the aromatic mixture to her raw soles before rebinding them. The effect was almost immediate, a cooling sensation that numbed the worst of the pain. "Thank you," she said, smiling at the older woman. "What is it made from?" Macawi pointed to various plants growing in crevices around the spring. A small flowering herb with silvery leaves, a type of succulent, and what appeared to be a species of wild garlic. Through gestures and simple words, she explained the preparation method. Charlotte listened intently, mentally cataloguing the information. Their father had taught his daughters the medicinal properties of many plants that grew around Providence, but these mountain varieties were new to her. Nearby, Rebecca had discovered a small cluster of children playing a game with marked stones, while their mothers prepared a quick meal of dried meat and berries. When one stone rolled her way, she picked it up, examining the symbols etched into its surface. A young girl, perhaps 7 or 8, approached hesitantly. "Hototo," she said, pointing to the stone. "Hototo," Rebecca repeated, smiling and offering the stone back. The child took it, then unexpectedly took Rebecca's hand as well, pulling her toward the game circle. For the next few minutes, Rebecca found herself being taught the rules of the children's game, something like a combination of jacks and dice, where stones were thrown and then gathered in specific combinations. Her genuine interest and quick learning delighted the children, who chattered excitedly in their language, clearly discussing this strange white woman who played their games. Abigail, meanwhile, had moved slightly away from the group, studying the trail they had traveled and the path ahead. Neshoba found her there, his expression questioning. "Looking for pursuers?" he asked. She nodded. "We've left tracks, disturbed stones. Someone who knows what to look for could follow." "Yes," Neshoba agreed, surprising her with his candor. "But white men not see signs like Comanche, not climb mountains like Comanche." He pointed to the rugged peaks surrounding them. "This land protects those who respect it. Is it far to this secret valley your father mentioned?" Neshoba considered the question. "2 more sleeps if we move fast. One mountain, then another. Between them, hidden place." He studied her with that direct gaze that seemed to penetrate her carefully maintained composure. "You doubt?" Abigail hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Not doubt exactly, concern. My sisters and I bring danger to your people. 2 of your warriors are dead because of us." "Dead because they chose to fight," Neshoba corrected. "Comanche, warrior knows each day may be his last." Something like grief flickered briefly across his features. "My brothers chose good deaths, protecting the tribe." The concept of a good death was foreign to Abigail's Christian upbringing, yet she found herself understanding the sentiment behind it. "Still," she said, "we can't stay with your people indefinitely. Eventually, we need to find our own path." Neshoba nodded slowly. "Secret Valley's safe place to decide path. No white men there, no soldiers. Time to heal, to think." He gestured toward the gathering tribe, now preparing to resume their journey. "First, we survive mountain." As they rejoined the group, Abigail noticed Taabe watching her and Neshoba with an unreadable expression. The chief said something to his son that caused Neshoba's jaw to tighten, though he merely nodded in response. The tribe resumed their trek as the sun began its westward descent. The trail grew even more challenging, at times requiring them to scramble on all fours up near vertical sections of rock. Once, a loose stone gave way beneath Rebecca's foot, sending her sliding toward a precipitous drop. Only Ituha's quick reflexes, grabbing Rebecca's pack and hauling her back to safety, prevented disaster. "Thank you," Rebecca gasped, her heart pounding as she regained her footing. Ituha simply nodded and continued climbing. But the shared danger seemed to shift something in their relationship, from wary acceptance to the beginnings of trust. Sunset, they had reached a protected hollow high on the mountainside, where stands of stunted pine provided some shelter from the wind that had begun to whip across the exposed ridges. No fires were lit, despite the rapidly cooling air. Instead, the tribe huddled in family groups, sharing body heat beneath buffalo robes and blankets. Ayana brought an extra robe to the sisters, who were attempting to find a comfortable position among the rough stones. "Sleep," she advised. "Tomorrow, harder." "How can it possibly be harder?" Charlotte murmured, as they arranged themselves beneath the shared covering. "I suspect we'll find out," Abigail replied, trying to massage feeling back into her aching legs. Despite their exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. The ground was hard, the temperature dropping rapidly, and strange mountain sounds echoed around them, the cry of a hunting owl, the distant howl of wolves, the whisper of wind through pine needles. Sometime deep in the night, Abigail woke too. Neshoba crouched beside their sleeping place, his finger to his lips in a gesture for silence. He beckoned her to follow. Carefully disentangling herself from her sisters, Abigail joined him at the hollow's edge. From there, they had a clear view of the valley they had fled, now bathed in moonlight. "Look," Neshoba whispered, pointing. "In." The distance, barely visible even in the clear night. Pinpricks of light moved along the canyon floor they had abandoned that morning. "Torches," Abigail breathed. "They've found the canyon." Neshoba nodded grimly. "Many men, not just from prison wagon. Soldiers, maybe." The implications were clear. This was no longer just about recapturing 3 escaped prisoners. The attack on the original pursuers had escalated the situation into a military matter. "We need to move," Abigail said urgently. "Now, before they find the trail." "Too dangerous in darkness," Neshoba replied. "Mountain will kill more surely than white men. We leave before dawn." He studied the distant lights. They searched canyon still. Many caves, many false trails. "We'll take time to find our path." He was right, Abigail knew. Attempting to navigate the treacherous mountain trail in darkness would be suicidal. Yet watching those searching lights, knowing each moment brought them closer to discovery, sent fear coiling through her stomach. "Sleep now," Neshoba advised. "Need strength tomorrow." But as Abigail returned to her sisters, sleep seemed impossible. She lay awake, mentally calculating distances and possibilities, searching for a solution that would ensure both their safety and that of the tribe that had sacrificed so much for them. An idea began to form. Dangerous, perhaps even foolhardy, but potentially effective. By the time the first hint of grey appeared in the eastern sky, she had made her decision. The tribe awakened and prepared to move with practiced efficiency. No food was cooked. They ate dried provisions quickly while packing their meager belongings. Within minutes, they were ready to resume their journey. Before they departed, Abigail approached Tabe, who was conferring with his warriors near the hollow's entrance. "I need to speak with you," she said, her voice steady despite her inner trepidation. Neshoba, standing beside his father, translated her request. Tabe regarded her with that same inscrutable expression he had worn the previous day, then nodded. When speaking through Neshoba, Abigail laid out her proposal. "The soldiers are looking for 3 white women, not a Comanche tribe. My sisters and I should separate from your people, leave an obvious trail leading away from your route. We'll draw them off, giving you time to reach the secret valley undetected." When translated, this suggestion caused immediate discussion among the warriors. Tabe listened to several opinions before responding. "Where would you go?" he asked through Neshoba. 3 women alone in mountains? "We survived before we met your people," Abigail pointed out. "We can make our way to Fort Richardson or another settlement, where you will be captured and returned." "Or to prison," Neshoba interjected, not waiting for his father's words. "Or killed for the deaths of white men at our canyon." "That's our risk to take," Abigail insisted. "We've brought enough death to your people." Tabe spoke at length, his tone thoughtful. When Neshoba translated, his own disagreement was evident in his voice. "My father says your courage honors your ancestors, but your plan would fail. White soldiers have dogs that follow scent. They would track both groups, find our people, kill many." He paused, then added, "And 3 white women traveling with Comanche is strange. But 3 white women in Comanche dress, alone in mountains, would be hunted by all. White soldiers, other tribes, outlaws." He was right, Abigail realized. Their plan, born of noble intentions, would likely lead to disaster for everyone. Tabe continued speaking, and Neshoba's translation softened. "Father says you think like a chief, willing to sacrifice for people. Good thinking, but wrong path." He gestured to the trail ahead. "Our path lies together for now. Beyond next mountain, decision can be made." As they resumed their grueling journey, Abigail found herself walking beside Makawi, who seemed determined to match the younger woman's pace, despite her advanced years. "You offer life for tribe," the older woman said in her limited English. "Good heart, strong spirit." She touched Abigail's arm briefly. "Spirits watch you now, guide path." Whether it was encouragement or prophecy, Abigail couldn't tell. But as they climbed ever higher into the mountains, leaving the searching soldiers far behind, she found herself drawing strength from the old woman's words. Whatever awaited them beyond the next mountain peak, they would face it with the resilience that had carried them this far. 3 sisters, united by blood and determination, now bound by unexpected ties to a people they were only beginning to understand. By mid-afternoon of the second day, the tribal procession reached what Neshoba called Eagle Pass, a narrow corridor between towering rock formations that looked from certain angles like great birds with outstretched wings. The pass marked the boundary between the first mountain range and the higher peaks that still lay before them. "Water ahead," Neshoba informed the sisters as they paused to catch their breath. "Good camp place for night." The prospect of water and rest revived their flagging spirits. The day's journey had been even more grueling than the previous one, with steeper climbs and more treacherous descents. Charlotte's feet, despite Makawi's medicinal paste, had begun bleeding again. Rebecca suffered from a persistent headache brought on by the altitude. Even Abigail, determined to show no weakness, felt her muscles screaming in protest with each step. The pass itself was barely 15 feet wide in places, with sheer rock walls rising hundreds of feet on either side. As they moved into its shadow, An unnatural quiet descended. The wind that had been their constant companion suddenly died, and even the birds fell silent. Taabe, leading the procession, stopped abruptly, raising his hand in a signal that halted the entire tribe. He conferred quickly with his warriors, their voices hushed. "What's wrong?" Abigail asked Neshoba, who had moved protectively closer to the sisters. "Not sure," he replied, his hand resting on his knife hilt. "Father senses danger." Taabe dispatched scouts to climb the rock walls on either side, watching intently as they scrambled up with remarkable agility. The tribe waited in tense silence, children instinctively quieting under their mothers' watchful eyes. One of the scouts had just reached a vantage point some 60 feet up when the attack came. The first warning was a whistling sound, followed by the scout's body plummeting from his perch, an arrow protruding from his chest. Before the tribe could react, more arrows rained down from hidden positions along the pass's rim. "Ambush!" Neshoba pushed the sisters against the cliff wall, shielding them with his body as chaos erupted. Abigail had a confused impression of running. Figures of children being gathered into the center of the group, of warriors positioning themselves protectively around the tribe's most vulnerable members. Through gaps in this defensive formation, she caught glimpses of their attackers, warriors dressed differently from the Comanche, with distinctive paint patterns on their faces and bodies. "Who are they?" she asked, pulling Charlotte closer, as an arrow struck the ground near their feet. "Kiowa," Neshoba replied grimly. "Old enemies, must have tracked us from Canyon." Taabe's voice rose above the commotion, issuing rapid commands. The tribe's warriors formed a protective circle, returning fire with their own bows, while the women and children huddled in the center. It was a desperate defensive posture, but the narrow pass limited the attackers' advantages, preventing them from surrounding the Comanche completely. The battle intensified as several Kiowa warriors descended into the pass itself, engaging the Comanche directly with war clubs and knives. The confined space became a scene of terrible violence, with fighters locked in deadly hand-to-hand combat. Rebecca clutched her mother's Bible tightly, her lips moving in silent prayer. Charlotte, despite her injured feet, had taken up a fallen Comanche warrior's knife, her expression showing she would use it if necessary. Abigail searched desperately for a way to help, for some action that might tip the balance in their favor. Her opportunity came when she spotted a Kiowa warrior creeping along a narrow ledge above them, positioning himself to fire down into the Comanche's defensive circle. Without hesitation, she grabbed a stone the size of her fist and hurled it with all her strength. Her aim was true. The stone struck the warrior's shoulder, disrupting his balance at a critical moment. He toppled from the ledge, landing with a sickening thud on the pass floor. Neshoba, who had witnessed her action, gave her a quick nod of approval before returning to the fight. The battle continued with brutal intensity, neither side willing to retreat. The pass's narrow confines echoed with war cries, the clash of weapons, and the groans of the wounded. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the tide turned. A Kiowa warrior, apparently their leader based on his elaborate headdress, fell beneath Taabe's tomahawk. Almost immediately, the remaining attackers began to withdraw, climbing back up the canyon walls or retreating deeper into the pass. Within minutes, an uneasy silence descended, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the weeping of those who had lost loved ones. The Comanche had prevailed, but at terrible cost. 4 warriors lay dead, and many others were wounded, some severely. Makawi immediately began organizing the women to tend the injured, assigning tasks based on each person's skills. To Charlotte's surprise, she was summoned to help with the wounded, her knowledge of medicinal plants apparently having impressed the old healer. "Come," Makawi directed. "Much work." For the next hour, Charlotte worked alongside the Comanche women, applying poultices to wounds, binding injuries and helping to extract arrowheads from those who had been shot. Her stomach churned at the blood and pain, but her hands remained steady. This was no time for weakness. Rebecca, meanwhile, had taken charge of the children, gathering them a safe distance from the injured and keeping them occupied with stories and simple games. Though they couldn't understand her words, her calm demeanor and gentle smile transcended language barriers, providing comfort amid the chaos. Abigail found herself helping Ayana and Ituha prepare the dead for burial, a solemn task that involved wrapping the fallen warriors in their blankets and placing their weapons and personal items beside them. The Comanche, she learned through Neshoba's translation, believed these possessions would be needed in the afterlife. As sunset approached, Taabe gathered the tribe for a brief but dignified ceremony. Each fallen warrior was commemorated with words describing his bravery and contributions to the tribe. Then, rather than burying the bodies, they were placed in crevices high on the canyon walls, closer to the sky spirits, Neshoba explained. Quietly, with night approaching and many wounded to care for, Taabe made the difficult decision to make camp in the pass despite the recent battle. Sentries were posted at both ends and along the rim, with shifts arranged to ensure constant vigilance. "Will they attack again?" Abigail asked Neshoba as they helped establish the camp. He studied the darkening sky before answering. "Not tonight. Kiowa respect brave fighting, respect their own dead. They withdraw to consider." His expression grew troubled. "But they will come again, maybe not tomorrow, but soon." "Why are they attacking?" Rebecca asked, joining them after settling the children for the night. "Is it because of us?" Neshoba shook his head. "Old enemies. Kiowa and Comanche fight for generations over hunting grounds, horses' honor. This attack—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Maybe because we leave canyon suddenly, shows weakness, makes them curious, or maybe just bad luck. Wrong place, meeting on mountain trail." Whatever the reason, the attack had further complicated their already precarious situation. The tribe now had wounded to transport, and their pace would necessarily slow. The pursuing soldiers, if they managed to follow their trail, would have that much more time to catch up. After a spare meal of jerked meat and berries, the tribe settled for the night, the mood somber. The sisters found themselves included in a family group with Ayana and Ituha, sharing blankets and the warmth of a small, carefully shielded fire. Unable to sleep, despite her exhaustion, Abigail wandered to the edge of the camp where Neshoba stood watch. The moon had risen, bathing the pass in silvery light that transformed the scene of earlier carnage into something almost peaceful. "You fought well today," Neshoba said without turning, somehow sensing her presence. "I threw a rock," Abigail replied. "Hardly fighting." "Rock hit enemy, saved arrows falling on children. Good fighting." He finally turned to face her. "You have warrior spirit." The compliment surprised her. "I was raised to abhor violence." "Difference between violence and protection," Neshoba observed. "Violence takes, protection gives, even when giving means fighting." He studied her face in the moonlight. "Your eyes see this difference." Abigail considered his words, finding unexpected wisdom in them. She had always viewed violence as fundamentally wrong, yet today's actions, both hers and the Comanche warriors, had been necessary to preserve innocent lives. "Tomorrow we reach mountaintop," Neshoba continued, changing the subject. "From there can see Secret Valley." He hesitated, then added, "Father says you and sisters will understand choice then." "What choice?" "To stay with tribe in valley or continue journey elsewhere." His expression was unreadable in the dim light. "Some think you bring bad luck. Others say you bring new strength. All will accept father's decision." The implication was clear. Their fate still hung in the balance, dependent on Tabe's judgment. Despite everything they had endured together, despite the growing bonds with individual tribe members, their place among the Comanche remained uncertain. Before Abigail could respond, a low whistle came from the sentry at the pass's western entrance. Neshoba immediately tensed, his hand moving to his knife. "Stay here," he ordered, moving silently toward the disturbance. Abigail, naturally, did no such thing. She followed at a discreet distance, keeping to the shadows as she had learned to do during their flight. What she saw made her blood run cold. In the moonlight, a small group of riders was approaching the pass, not Kiowa warriors, but white men. Even at this distance, the military uniforms were unmistakable. Somehow, the soldiers had managed to follow their trail. As Neshoba conferred urgently with the sentry, Abigail slipped back to camp and quickly woke her sisters. "Soldiers," she whispered, "at the western entrance. We need to warn everyone." Rebecca's eyes widened in alarm. "How did they find us so quickly?" "It doesn't matter now," Charlotte said, already struggling to her feet despite her painful injuries. "We need to help the tribe prepare." That simple statement highlighted how much had changed in the days since their escape. They no longer thought of themselves as separate from the Comanche, as outsiders temporarily aligned with strangers. Their fates had become intertwined, their loyalty no longer divided. As Tabe organized a desperate defense, positioning his already depleted warriors at strategic points throughout the pass, Abigail made a silent vow. Whatever happened in the coming confrontation, the Mason sisters would stand with the people who had risked everything to protect them. The secret valley beyond the mountain's peak suddenly seemed much farther away than a single day's journey. Between them and that promised sanctuary now stood yet another deadly challenge, one that would test not only their courage and resourcefulness, but the very bonds they had begun to forge with their unexpected saviors. Tabe's response to the approaching soldiers was immediate and decisive. Rather than attempting to fight a second battle with his wounded warriors, he ordered a swift and silent evacuation toward the eastern end of the pass. "Lift, wounded," he commanded through Neshoba's translation. "Leave no trace. Must reach high." Path before soldiers enter pass. The tribe moved with remarkable efficiency despite their injuries and fatigue. The most severely wounded were carefully hoisted onto makeshift stretchers. Those who could walk supported each other. Fire pits were quickly covered with sand, leaving no evidence of their presence except for bloodstains on the rocks that couldn't be concealed. "What about the bodies of the Kiowa?" Abigail asked as they worked. "The fallen enemy warriors still lay where they had fallen during the battle." "Leave them," Neshoba replied grimly. "Soldiers will think Kiowa still here, fight them instead of following us." It was a clever tactic, using the presence of one enemy to distract another. Within minutes, the tribe had gathered their essential belongings and begun moving silently toward a nearly invisible trail that switchbacked up the eastern wall of the pass. "This way, not on maps," Neshoba explained as he guided the sisters toward the steep path. "Old Comanche secret. Very dangerous, but soldiers not follow." Dangerous proved an understatement. The trail was barely wide enough for a single person in most places, with a sheer rock face on one side and a dizzying drop on the other. In the pale moonlight, each step required careful placement. Charlotte, her feet still bleeding from earlier injuries, bit her lip to keep from crying out as she forced herself to continue climbing. When she stumbled on a loose stone, Ituha, who had positioned herself directly behind Charlotte, caught her before she could fall. "Lean on me," the Comanche woman offered in halting English. "Strong together." The tribe climbed steadily, the wounded supported between family members, children carried on backs or in arms. Below them, they heard the soldiers enter the pass, their voices echoing against the stone walls as they discovered the Kiowa bodies. "They're distracted," Abigail whispered to Nashoba. "It's working." He nodded, but his expression remained tense. "For now, day comes soon. Light shows trail." By the time they reached a small plateau halfway up the mountain, the eastern sky had begun to lighten. In the growing illumination, they could see both the pass below and the imposing peak still looming. Above them, the soldiers were visible now, a contingent of perhaps 20 men examining the battle scene, clearly confused by the presence of dead Kiowa warriors rather than the Comanche tribe they had been tracking. Leading the soldiers was a figure the sisters recognized immediately. Sheriff Durbin. Rebecca breathed, her face paling. "He's leading the soldiers himself." This complicated matters significantly. Unlike the military men who were likely just following orders, Durbin had personal reasons to pursue them. His wounded pride over Rebecca's rejection, and now, potentially, revenge for the deaths of his men at the canyon. Tabe studied the scene, below through narrowed eyes, before issuing new orders. The tribe would split into 2 groups, the wounded children, and most of the women would continue along the high path toward the mountain peak, while a smaller party of warriors would create a false trail leading in another direction to draw off pursuit. "I should go with the warriors," Abigail said immediately. "If Durbin sees a white woman, he'll follow that trail for certain." Nashoba translated this suggestion to his father, who considered it briefly before shaking his head. Through Nashoba, he explained, "Too dangerous. Warriors may have to fight, may not return. You stay with sisters, continue to valley." But Abigail stood her ground. "This is our fault. Those are our enemies. Let me help fix this." A long, tense moment passed as Tabe studied her determined expression. Finally, he gave a single, curt nod. "She goes with warriors. Only her. Sisters continue with tribe." Both Rebecca and Charlotte immediately protested, but Abigail silenced them with a raised hand. "This makes sense," she insisted. "I'm the oldest. If anything happens—" She couldn't finish the thought, but her meaning was clear. If one of them had to risk capture or worse, it should be her. "I'll find you in the valley," she promised her sisters. "This is just temporary, a diversion." The parting was brief by necessity. The soldiers could spot them at any moment. Abigail embraced her sisters tightly, then joined the small group of warriors who would create the false trail. Nashoba, to her surprise, was among them. "Father says I guide you," he explained as they prepared to depart. "Bring you to valley after soldiers follow false trail." The main group continued their ascent, climbing steadily toward the peak that separated them from the secret valley. The diversionary party, consisting of Abigail, Nashoba, and 5 Comanche warriors, began working their way along a visible ledge that curved around the mountain's southern face, a path that would be clearly visible to anyone watching from below. "Make many tracks," Nashoba instructed. "Break branches, leave sign." The warriors understood immediately, deliberately disturbing rocks and vegetation as they moved along the ledge. One even unraveled part of his blanket, leaving threads caught on thorny bushes, obvious markers for trackers to follow. They had traveled perhaps half a mile along this exposed route when a shout echoed from below. The soldiers had spotted them. "Down!" Nashoba pulled Abigail behind a boulder as rifle fire erupted from the pass. Bullets ricocheted off stone around them, sending chips flying. "They've seen us," Abigail said unnecessarily, her heart pounding. "Good. Now what?" "Now we run," Nashoba replied with a grim smile. "Make them follow, far from tribe's path." The diversionary group continued along the ledge, periodically exposing themselves just enough to draw fire and maintain the soldiers' interest. It was a dangerous game. The rifles had considerable range, and several shots came uncomfortably close. By mid-morning, they had led their pursuers several miles from the pass, following a circuitous route that kept them visible enough to be followed, but protected enough to avoid being shot. The soldiers, hampered by their horses on the difficult terrain, had been forced to proceed on foot, slowing their pursuit, but making them no less determined. Need to move faster, Neshoba decided as they paused behind a rock outcropping to catch their breath. Soldiers too close. One of the warriors pointed to a narrow ravine that cut deeply into the mountainside ahead. Through Neshoba's translation, he explained that the ravine led to a series of caves, a place where they could potentially lose their pursuers, or, if necessary, make a stand. They had just started toward this potential sanctuary when a shot rang, out from much closer than expected. One of the warriors stumbled, clutching his shoulder as blood bloomed across his buckskin shirt. Spinning around, Abigail saw a small group of soldiers who had somehow managed to climb a parallel ridge, cutting off their intended route. Among them stood Sheriff Durbin, his rifle still raised. Ambush, Neshoba hissed, pulling her down as more shots followed. They circle us. Caught between two groups of soldiers with limited cover, their situation had suddenly become desperate. The wounded warrior was pulled to safety by his companions, but their position was rapidly becoming untenable. There, Neshoba pointed to a jumble of massive boulders about 50 yards ahead, the result of an ancient rockslide that had created a natural fortress of stone. Run when I say. He conferred quickly with the other warriors, who nodded their understanding. Then, with no further warning, all 5 Comanche braves suddenly broke from cover, firing arrows and charging toward the closer group of soldiers with war cries that echoed off the mountainside. Now! Neshoba grabbed Abigail's hand, pulling her. In a desperate sprint toward the boulder field, while their companions created the diversion, bullets whined past them as they ran, but the soldiers' aim was disrupted by the charging warriors. They reached the shelter of the boulders just as 2 more Comanche fell to the soldiers' rifles. Your brothers, Abigail gasped as they pressed themselves into a narrow crevice between massive stones. Chose warrior's path, Neshoba replied, though his voice held more emotion than his stoic words suggested. Good death's protecting tribe. He checked his weapons, a knife, a tomahawk, and a bow with only 3 remaining arrows. We go deeper into rocks, find way around soldiers. The boulder field was a maze of passages and chambers formed by massive stones balanced precariously against one another. Some spaces were large enough to stand in, others required them to crawl. On hands and knees, they moved as quickly as they dared, listening intently for sounds of pursuit. Behind them, the gunfire had stopped, replaced by an ominous silence. Either the warriors had escaped or, more likely, they had fallen in their last desperate charge. Do you think any of them survived? Abigail asked as they paused to get their bearings. Neshoba's expression was somber. Maybe 1 or 2. Warriors. Know mountains, know how to disappear if wounded. He peered through a narrow gap between boulders, assessing their situation. Soldiers splitting up, searching boulders. We must keep moving. Their progress became a tense game of hide-and-seek, freezing at sounds of pursuit, then darting to new cover when the way seemed clear. Twice they barely avoided detection, pressing themselves into shadowy crevices as soldiers passed within, feet of their hiding places. By early afternoon, they had worked their way through the boulder field to its far edge, where the terrain opened into a grassy slope, leading to yet another ridge. Beyond that ridge, Neshoba explained in hushed tones, lay a route that would eventually reconnect with the tribe's path to the secret valley. Open ground, Abigail observed, studying the expanse they would need to cross. They'll see us immediately. Wait for darkness, Neshoba decided. Cross when night comes. But waiting carried its own risks. The soldiers were methodically searching the boulder field, their cordon tightening with each passing hour. Sooner or later, they would be discovered. As the sun began its westward descent, casting long shadows across the mountain, they found themselves forced into an increasingly small area. The sounds of searching soldiers grew closer, their calls to one another indicating a coordinated effort to flush out any remaining fugitives. No choice now, Neshoba said grimly. Must run soon, before completely surrounded. Abigail nodded, steeling herself for what might be their final, desperate bid for freedom. But as they prepared to make their break across the open ground, a new sound reached them, the distinctive war cries of Comanche warriors coming from the direction they had originally fled. Neshoba's eyes widened in surprise. "Impossible," he breathed. "All warriors with us or with tribe." Yet the war cries continued, drawing the soldiers' attention back toward the pass. Gunfire erupted again, and shouts of alarm suggested the soldiers were now under attack themselves. "Kiowa, gone," Neshoba murmured, thinking aloud. "Not Comanche from Canyon, all with tribe or—" He gestured to indicate the fallen warriors. Who attacked soldiers? The answer came as abruptly as the question. From their vantage point among the boulders, they could now see movement on the ridge they had traversed earlier that day. Mounted warriors, at least a dozen, charging toward the soldiers' position with unmistakable ferocity. "Comanche," Neshoba confirmed, his voice filled with wonder. "But not our band." He studied their distinctive paint and adornments. "Buffalo clan, from plains to east." "Allies of your people?" Abigail asked hopefully. "Sometimes allies, sometimes rivals," Neshoba replied, "but all Comanche hate bluecoat soldiers." Whatever the reason for their timely arrival, the Buffalo Clan warriors had created the perfect diversion. The soldiers were now fully engaged in defending themselves against this new threat, their attention diverted from the boulder field entirely. Now, Neshoba decided, we cross while soldiers fight. Taking advantage of the chaos, they slipped from the boulder field and sprinted across the open ground toward the next ridge. No shots followed them. The soldiers were too occupied with their unexpected attackers to notice two figures fleeing in the opposite direction. As they crested the ridge and found cover in a stand of pine on its far side, Abigail cast one last glance back at the battle. The Buffalo Clan warriors were executing a classic hit-and-run strategy, striking at the soldiers before withdrawing out of rifle range, only to circle and attack again from another direction. "They fight smart," Neshoba observed. "Give us time to escape." They continued moving rapidly away from the conflict, following game trails that gradually curved back toward the main mountain peak. By sunset, the sounds of battle had faded completely, and they found themselves in unfamiliar territory, a series of smaller ridges and valleys that Neshoba studied with growing concern. "Lost main trail," he admitted finally. "Need to find different path to valley." The admission was serious. Without the main trail, they faced the prospect of wandering the mountains indefinitely, perhaps never reconnecting with the tribe, or Abigail's sisters. As darkness fell and the temperature dropped precipitously, they sought shelter in a shallow cave formed by an overhanging rock. With no blankets and no way to safely light a fire that might attract attention, they huddled together for warmth, the day's exertions catching up with them in waves of bone-deep exhaustion. "Sleep," Neshoba advised. "I watch first." But Abigail found sleep elusive despite her fatigue. Her thoughts kept returning to her sisters, to the tribe, to the warriors who had sacrificed themselves to ensure their escape. So much loss, so much violence, all stemming from what should have been a simple journey to justice in a prison wagon not so many days ago. "Do you think we'll find them?" she asked softly. "My sisters, your people?" Neshoba was silent for a long moment before answering. "Valley has many entrances, many paths. If spirits wish us to find tribe, we will." It wasn't the definitive reassurance she might have hoped for, but Abigail found comfort in its honesty. In this wild, unforgiving landscape, nothing was certain except the next step on the path and the determination to take it, regardless of what lay ahead. Rebecca and Charlotte crested the mountain peak with the main group of the Comanche tribe just as the sun reached its zenith. The ascent had been grueling, steeper and more treacherous than anything they had yet encountered. Several times they had been forced to use improvised ropes to haul the wounded up near vertical sections of the trail. Now, standing at the summit, Both sisters turned instinctively to look back the way they had come, searching for any sign of Abigail and the diversionary party. The distant sounds of gunfire had reached them periodically throughout the morning, each exchange heightening their worry. "Do you think she's alive?" Charlotte asked softly, voicing the fear that had been growing in both their hearts. Rebecca squeezed her sister's hand. "Abby's smart and tough, and Nashoba won't let anything happen to her." Though she spoke with conviction, Rebecca's chest felt hollow with dread. She had witnessed the way Sheriff Durbin dealt with those who defied him. If he captured Abigail, mercy would not be forthcoming. Tabe approached the sisters, his weathered face revealing nothing of his own thoughts regarding his son and the warriors who had stayed behind. Through gestures and the few English words, he indicated they must continue without delay. "Valley," he said, pointing to the northern face of the mountain. "Close now." Reluctantly, the sisters turned from their vigil and followed Tabe to where the tribe had gathered. From this vantage point, they could see their destination for the first time, and the sight took their breath away. Nestled between the mountain they stood upon and another peak to the north lay a valley of breathtaking beauty. Unlike the rugged, scrubby terrain they had traversed for days, this hidden place was a verdant paradise. A lake of startling blue occupied its center, fed by waterfalls that cascaded down from snow-capped heights. Meadows of vibrant wildflowers stretched along the valley floor, interspersed with groves of trees that provided natural shelter. The entire valley was ringed by steep cliffs and ridges that effectively concealed it from the outside world. "It's beautiful," Charlotte whispered, momentarily forgetting her exhaustion and worry. Tabe nodded in understanding. "Taha numunu," he said, using Comanche words. Seeing their confusion, he attempted an explanation with his limited English. "Great Spirit Place, Sacred Valley." Makawi, who had joined them at the overlook, elaborated in her halting English. "Valley feed people, heal people, protect people." She spread her hands to indicate the abundance below. "Summer home long ago, now secret place for bad times." The path down into the valley proved considerably easier than their ascent had been. A series of switchbacks, well established and clearly long used, allowed them to descend at a steady pace. By mid-afternoon, they had reached the valley floor, and the tribe immediately set about establishing camp near the shore of the lake. Rebecca and Charlotte found themselves drawn into the activity, helping to erect teepees and prepare food. The tribe moved with the efficiency of people who had performed these tasks countless times, each person knowing their role without need for instruction. As darkness approached, both sisters found it increasingly difficult to maintain their composure. There had been no sign of Abigail or the diversionary party, and the distant sounds of conflict had ceased hours earlier. "We should go back for her," Charlotte said as they gathered firewood at the edge of a pine grove. "We can't just leave her out there." Rebecca shared her sister's sentiment, but recognized the impossibility of what she proposed. "We wouldn't know where to start looking, Charlie, and we'd never survive the mountain crossing on our own. So we just wait? Do nothing while our sister might be—" Charlotte couldn't finish the thought. "We trust," Rebecca said firmly, though her own faith felt tenuous. "We trust that Abigail and Nashoba will find their way here." That evening, as the tribe gathered around cooking fires, Tabe conducted a solemn ceremony for the warriors left behind. Though the sisters couldn't understand the words, the meaning was clear, honoring those who had sacrificed themselves for the tribe's safety. When he mentioned Nashoba, both Rebecca and Charlotte felt a chill of foreboding. Later, as they lay sleepless in the teepee they shared with Ayana and Ituha, Charlotte voiced what both had been thinking. "He speaks of Nashoba, as if he's already dead." Rebecca stared at the smoke hole above, through which stars were visible. In the night sky, the Comanche honor their fallen warriors. It doesn't mean they've given up hope, but her words sounded hollow, even to her own ears. The tribe's behavior, the finality of the ceremony, the distribution of Neshoba's few possessions, among his close friends, suggested they considered him lost. Morning brought no news, and no sign of the missing party. Life in the valley settled into a routine as the tribe began establishing a more permanent camp. The wounded were tended in a special tipi set up as a healing lodge. Hunting parties brought back deer and small game. Women gathered wild fruits and edible plants that grew in abundance. Despite their persistent worry for Abigail, both Rebecca and Charlotte found themselves deeply involved in the daily activities. Rebecca's natural affinity for children made her a welcome addition to the group of women who cared for the tribe's youngest members. Charlotte, who had always shared their father's interest in medicinal plants, continued to assist Makawi with the wounded, learning new healing techniques and discovering plants she had never encountered before. On their third day in the valley, Ituha invited them to accompany her to a hidden corner of the lake where hot springs bubbled up through the rocks, creating naturally heated pools. After days of mountain travel and limited washing, the opportunity for a proper bath was irresistible. As they soaked in the warm mineral water, Charlotte found herself studying the Comanche woman. Ituha's dark hair, usually braided tightly, now floated loose around her shoulders. A jagged scar ran across her collarbone, evidence of some past injury or perhaps a ritual marking. "You have questions?" Ituha observed, her English improving daily through their interactions. Charlotte nodded. "Many. About your people, this place, about what happens next." Ituha considered this, then pointed to the southern ridge they had crossed to enter the valley. "That way, White World. That way," she gestured to the northern end of the valley. "Comanche World. Here," she drew a circle in the water's surface. "Between worlds. Special place." "Neshoba called it sacred," Rebecca said. "What makes it sacred?" Ituha's expression grew thoughtful. "Old stories say Great Spirit made this place for healing between peoples. Many tribes know valley, Comanche, Kiowa, Apache, but no fighting here." "Peace place. Then why did the Kiowa attack us at the pass?" Charlotte asked. "Pass, not valley," Ituha explained. "Different place, different rules." She frowned slightly. "Also, Kiowa maybe not know we go to Sacred Valley. Think we run to White settlements." This conversation was interrupted by a shout from the shoreline. All three women turned to see a young Comanche boy pointing excitedly toward the southern ridge. Following his gesture, they spotted a small group of figures slowly making their way down the switchbacks. Rebecca was on her feet instantly, water cascading from her body as she strained to see. "Is it them? Is it Abigail?" Ituha squinted against the afternoon sun. Two people only, not whole party. They dressed hastily and rushed back to the main camp, where a small crowd had already gathered, watching the approaching figures. As they drew closer, identities became clear. Neshoba supporting a limping but very much alive Abigail. "Abby!" Both sisters ran toward the path, their faces streaming with relieved tears. The reunion was emotional and chaotic, with all three sisters clinging to each other as if afraid they might be separated again at any moment. Abigail looked exhausted, her face scratched and bruised, her clothing torn and blood-stained in places, but her eyes were clear and alert, reflecting her indomitable spirit. "We thought we'd lost you," Charlotte sobbed, burying her face against her eldest sister's shoulder. "Nearly did," Abigail admitted, her voice hoarse from thirst. "More than once." Neshoba stood slightly apart, allowing the sisters their moment. His own appearance spoke of what they had endured, a makeshift bandage wrapped around his upper arm, his face gaunt with hunger and exhaustion. Yet when Tabe approached, Neshoba straightened, meeting his father's gaze with quiet dignity. The reunion between father and son was more restrained than that of the sisters, consisting of a firm clasp of forearms and a few words spoken in Comanche. But the emotion behind it was no less powerful for its lack of demonstrativeness. That evening, around the central fire, Abigail and Neshoba recounted their journey, the diversionary tactics, the ambush, their narrow escape through the boulder field, and the unexpected intervention of the Buffalo Clan warriors. They described their subsequent wanderings through unfamiliar territory, surviving on what little they could forage, navigating by stars and instinct until they finally located a hunting trail that led them to the valley's southern rim. The other warriors? Tabe asked through another translator, his expression grave. Neshoba's reply, though delivered in Comanche, needed no translation. His somber tone and downcast eyes conveyed what words could not. None of the others had survived. Moment of silence followed this news, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Then Tabe spoke at length, his words carrying the weight of formal pronouncement. When he finished, the tribe members nodded in solemn agreement. "What did he say?" Abigail asked Ituha, who sat nearby. "Father says debt to Mason's sisters now paid." The Comanche woman translated, "Warrior's blood balanced by your blood, your sister's courage. Now you free to choose, stay with tribe or go own way when healing done." The words hung in the air between them, laden with significance. After all they had endured together, after the bonds formed through shared danger and sacrifice, the tribe was offering them a choice: genuine membership among the Comanche, or the freedom to depart with no obligation. As the implications sank, Abigail found herself meeting Neshoba's gaze across the fire. Something passed between them, an unspoken communication that transcended the barriers of language and culture. In his eyes, she saw not just respect for a fellow survivor, but something deeper, something that stirred unexpected emotions in her own heart. The choice Tabe offered was not a simple one. To return to white society meant facing the lingering threat of Sheriff Durbin's vengeance, the stigma of their prison sentence, and the biases against women without family or fortune. Yet to remain with the Comanche meant embracing a life utterly different from everything they had known. New customs, new language, new ways of understanding the world. As the fire burned lower and the tribe gradually dispersed to their sleeping in quarters, the three sisters remained huddled together as they had done since childhood during times of important decisions. "What should we do?" Charlotte asked, voicing the question that occupied all their thoughts. Rebecca touched the Bible she still carried, their last tangible connection to their parents and their former life. "Father always said God's plan reveals itself in unexpected ways." Abigail gazed out at the moonlit valley, the secret sanctuary that had seemed like a distant legend just days ago and now might become their home. "I think," she said slowly, "that sometimes freedom means letting go of who we thought we would be to discover who we truly are." As they contemplated this profound insight, the valley seemed to embrace them with its tranquil beauty. A place between worlds where three sisters displaced by injustice might forge a future none of them could have imagined. 2 weeks passed in the secret valley, a time of healing and contemplation for the Mason sisters. Abigail's injuries from her harrowing escape with Neshoba gradually mended. Charlotte's feet, treated daily with Makawi's herbal remedies, finally stopped bleeding and began to callous. Rebecca, always the most adaptable, had started learning the Comanche language in earnest, practicing diligently with the children who found her attempts both fascinating and amusing. The deadline for their decision approached. Tabe had explained through Neshoba that the tribe would remain in the valley until the first autumn snow, then return to their winter grounds many miles to the northwest, territory unfamiliar to white settlers. If the sisters chose to leave, they would need to depart before this migration. On a clear morning, Abigail found herself walking along the lakeshore with Neshoba. These solitary conversations had become a daily ritual, beginning as practical discussions about survival skills, but gradually evolving into deeper exchanges about their respective cultures, beliefs, and personal histories. "Your father says we must decide soon," Abigail said, as they paused to watch an eagle soaring above the lake. Neshoba nodded. "Snow comes early to mountains. Journey to winter grounds is difficult. What would it mean for my sisters and me if we chose to stay with your people?" He considered this carefully before answering. "Learning our ways, speaking our language, living as Comanche women." His gaze met hers directly. "Some find it hard path, and would we always be outsiders?" This was the question that had troubled Abigail most, whether they could ever truly belong. "At first, yes," Neshoba admitted. "But Comanche have taken others into tribe before. Mexican children, sometimes white women. Those who embrace our ways become Numunu in truth, not just name." He hesitated, then added something he had never spoken of before. "My mother was captive once. Kiowa woman taken in raid when young. Became my father's wife, became respected healer. No one thought of her as outside after years passed." This revelation surprised Abigail. It explained Makawi's immediate connection with Charlotte. Perhaps she recognized something in the young woman that reminded her of herself decades earlier. And what of... Abigail paused, uncertain how to express the question that had increasingly occupied her thoughts. What of marriages between Comanche and those adopted into the tribe? Neshoba's expression remained carefully neutral, though something flickered in his eyes. "Happens sometimes. If both choose freely, if both families agree." He met her gaze steadily. "Would need to know each other longer, learn if spirits truly walk same path." The implication was clear and not unwelcome. In their shared ordeal, something had awakened between them, a connection neither had anticipated, but both now acknowledged. While Abigail explored these possibilities with Neshoba, her sisters were having parallel experiences of their own. Charlotte had become Makawi's apprentice in earnest, learning the medicinal properties of plants that grew in abundance throughout the valley. Her natural affinity for healing, combined with knowledge passed down from their father, had earned her the respect of tribe members who initially viewed her with suspicion. Rebecca, meanwhile, had formed an unexpected bond with Tabe himself. The chief had discovered her reading from their mother's Bible one evening, and through gestures and his limited English, expressed curiosity about the stories contained within. Using simple words and drawings in the dirt, Rebecca had begun sharing biblical narratives with him, finding, to her surprise, that many concepts resonated with Comanche spiritual beliefs despite the vastly different expressions. As the day of decision approached, the sisters gathered at a secluded spot overlooking the valley, a small promontory that offered privacy for their most important conversation since arriving in this hidden sanctuary. "We need to decide," Abigail began, her tone gentle but resolute. "Together, as we've always done." Charlotte nodded, her formerly delicate hands now calloused from work with medicinal plants. "Makawi says I have the gift of healing. She believes I could become a medicine woman with proper training." Rebecca's expression was thoughtful as she cradled their mother's Bible. "Tabe has asked me to teach reading to the children. He believes knowledge of the white man's ways may help the tribe survive the changes coming to these lands." "And you, Abby?" Charlotte asked. "What path do you see?" Abigail gazed across the valley, her eyes lingering on the distant figure of Neshoba instructing young warriors in bow hunting techniques. "I see possibilities I never imagined in Providence. Freedom not defined by others' expectations." A moment of silence passed between them, each sister contemplating what leaving or staying would mean. "If we return to white society," Rebecca said finally. "We return as fugitives. Sheriff Durbin will never stop hunting us." "And even if we could clear our names," Charlotte added, "what waits for us? The same narrow options, marriage to men who see us as property, or lives as spinsters dependent on others' charity." Abigail nodded slowly. "Here, we've found respect based on our abilities, not our gender or social position." She met each sister's eyes in turn. "But I won't make this choice for us. We decide together or not at all." In the fading light of sunset, their discussion continued, weighing possibilities against uncertainties, dreams against practicalities. The valley spread before them like a living promise, a place of beauty and abundance, yet so different from everything they had known. As darkness settled over the mountains, they reached their decision. Together, as they had faced every challenge since their parents' deaths, they would forge a new path, neither fully embracing their old identity nor completely abandoning it, but creating something unique at the intersection of two worlds. Following morning, the sisters approached Taabe as he conducted the tribe's council. Standing before the assembled Comanche, Abigail spoke for all three. "We choose to stay," she announced, her voice clear and confident. "To learn your ways, to contribute to your tribe, to share our knowledge while gaining yours." When Nashoba translated these words, murmurs of approval spread through the gathering. Taabe rose, his weathered face solemn, yet pleased. Through Nashoba, he responded, "The spirits guided you to our people for a purpose. Your courage has been tested, your hearts found strong. From this day you are Numunu, the people." In a ceremony that followed, each sister received a Comanche name reflecting qualities the tribe had observed in them. Charlotte became Healing, Hands, Rebecca, Keeper of Stories, and Abigail, Woman who Finds the Path. That evening, as the tribe celebrated with dancing and feasting, Abigail stood at the edge of the gathering. Nashoba joined her, his presence a comfortable silence beside her. "Your path leads with our tribe now," he said finally. "Where does it lead tomorrow, next moon, next year?" Abigail smiled, watching her sisters fully engaged in the celebration. Charlotte identifying constellations with Makawi, Rebecca playing a counting game with the children. "I don't know exactly," she admitted, "but for the first time since leaving Providence, I'm not running from something. I'm running toward something." Nashoba nodded in understanding. "Good way to travel life's path." As the celebration continued, around them, three sisters who had fled injustice found themselves embraced by an unexpected future. The prison wagon that had carried them into the wilderness had set them on a journey to true freedom, not the freedom of unfettered movement, but the deeper liberty of self-determination, of choosing one's own destiny despite society's constraints. In the sacred valley that existed between worlds, the Mason sisters had discovered their true inheritance, not land or possessions, but the courage to forge their own path across the uncharted territory of possibility. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.